Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Dan Glass. I am the sales manager for PointLink, and I'm expecting a couple more team members to show up, and I'll introduce them. I'll have Ian O'Neill here with me. He's the product manager for the product that we're going to be talking about today, and Tony Forsyth will be joining me. This is Ian. Tony Forsyth is the owner of PointLink. And so I'll go ahead and kind of give a little overview of kind of what we're going to talk about today. I've titled my session Something About Mary because we're going to go through the life cycle of a law student, and her name is Mary Travers. And so we're going to go through that life cycle, and I'll explain all of that. But before we start, I want to give you a little company overview about who PointLink is and how we ended up here today. PointLink was started in 1999. We're as a general software development company. We're doing a lot of web-based development. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess it was, we started working with Washington University School of Law. And in working with Washington University School of Law, we developed a product called SeatChat. And what it was a seating chart application product that helps law schools build seating charts. It was built to replace the cut and paste method. So we built that for Washington University School of Law, and we took it to now I think about 30 law schools are using the seating chart. So we've spent a lot of time working with law schools. Also, in working with Washington University, they asked us to build them a communications portal, and they asked us to build that specifically in SharePoint, Microsoft SharePoint. And so we built that portal, the communication portal for them in SharePoint 2.0. And then as soon as we rolled that out to them, Yale Law School contacted us and asked us to build a similar communications portal only in SharePoint MOS 2007. So that's kind of how we got here today. And I want to give you our belief statement. In working with all these law schools, we've basically found and have been told that ineffective communication is a significant problem for law schools. And we've been told that over and over and over again. And how do we know that that's actually a true statement? Is we found that there's frustration throughout many of the users in the law school. There's frustration for faculty, for staff, and for students, and for the departments in general. Faculty seem to be frustrated because they want to know why can't I get my test results quicker? Why do I have to wait so long for test results? When can I have my evaluation results? Why does it take so long to get those? Why do I have to wait 3 weeks to get my seating chart to learn which students are seated in which seat when I need to know it on the first day of class? So there's frustration on the faculty level. There's frustration on the staff level because the staff, we've been told, continually provide information to students over and over and over again, and the students basically aren't listening to it. They provide it in email, they provide it in a docket format, in a PDF, they put it on the website. So they do all this effort, and then the student at the end of the day calls them up and asks them the same question that they just emailed them 3 times about. So there's frustration there. So good communication versus bad communication, and we were trying to think of a good example of this, and we came up with, well, what's the difference between music and noise? And the difference between music and noise is noise is basically disorganized sound. And music has a rhyme, rhythm, it has an order to it, it has some sort of systematic approach, there's planning involved in music. And if we're trying to play music and the audience hears noise, well, there's a problem. And if we're trying to communicate to students and they're not getting it, well, there's a problem. So that's how we basically got our belief statement that the ineffective communication is a major problem in law school. So if we all believe that, then we can move on. And we can talk about, well, why is it ineffective? And we see that communication preferences a lot of times aren't necessarily understood. We don't know how the student wants us to communicate to them. That kind of goes along with our little music example of we don't really know what song they want to hear. We don't know what song to play. We don't know what type of music to play that the student even cares about. We find that our communications really aren't focused and they really aren't relevant to the user. At the end of the day, we're blast emailing everybody, and that information is not necessarily relevant to the person receiving the email. That kind of correlates as we're not all playing from the same sheet music, I And we find that many times there's an inadequate tool set. Law schools many times don't have the proper tool set to communicate with students, or they're using an inefficient tool set. And that's like playing with an instrument that would be out of tune. And we find that sometimes there's lack of communication. We have, or cooperation, I'm sorry. We have a department who, they really like email and they want to email students, and we have another department who would rather post information to the public-facing website or put it on a course site or something like that. So we really need more cooperation there. So what we end up with is a scenario that can resemble something like this. We have a student information system. It's pumping information into multiple applications. We're trying to get the information into these applications so that we can communicate with each users. The users are expected to go to each of these different applications to find the information that they need. In addition to that, we pile on manual workflows, we pile on blast email, and various other forms of communication. So you can see that the information that's provided is somewhat inconsistent. It depends on individuals actually making an effort to do things and log into the systems that they need to get into. It's basically a burden on most users. And it's a complex environment to communicate in because there's not a lot of order and organization here. So does this look familiar to anyone, maybe? So our objective is pretty straightforward. We want to facilitate effective communications, and we want to improve the legal educational environment for students, faculty, and staff. And I have a demonstration of what an ideal scenario might look like. I think that we need a school-wide commitment. We need everybody to get on the same sheet music and say, yeah, we're gonna all try to communicate to the student in an effective and efficient manner. We want the information that we're providing them to be relevant, and we're all going to do this together as an organization. We're going to get on the same page, and we're going to use cooperation in doing this. We're all going to make a commitment that we're going to not use blast email to deliver messages to students, because we know they don't read it anyway. So why do we keep pushing information to them in that form? And we really need to have a proper tool set to accomplish our goals. And for our demonstration and for our example today, that tool set is going to be Microsoft SharePoint, and it's the product that we built. We call it MyLaw, and it's built on Microsoft MOS 2007. And then we also have identity management tools. We call those Academic Access Manager, and Tony's going to talk a little bit about those when we conclude the presentation or the life cycle example. So we can take a demonstration that looks something like this, where we've got the student information system feeding multiple databases and multiple applications, and we can move into a system that looks a little more streamlined. We have the student information system still feeding our application or our communications portal, but it's doing it through a single database, and we're using a single authentication process to manage our collaboration portal. And inside of our collaboration portal, you can see we have communication. So that's targeted information. We have a docket inside there. We have collaboration. Those are the organization sites. Those are collaboration sites, committee sites, department sites. That fits under the collaboration column there. It's the second column. And we have our learning management features. This would be online course evaluations, the LMS part of this, take-home exams, and our seating chart product. And then we have some miscellaneous pieces that fit in for photo directory, forms, and workflow. So we're going to try to show a little bit of that as we go through this life cycle of Mary Travers. You can see that at the top we have our users, students, faculty, staff, and affiliates. So it does span beyond just the law school, the immediate law school environment. This can span to instructors or faculty at other universities that need this type of information. And they're all accessing it through a single login, through the single portal where they can get all the communications and collaborate the way they need to collaborate here. Also, I just want to point out a couple of the value statements. I think if we can get to a system that looks something like this, we can reduce paper usage, we can reduce the mass emails, we can really target content much more effectively and efficiently. So the life cycle of Mary Travers is probably what we've all been waiting to get to here. Let me introduce Mary. This is a photo of Mary. Mary, her hometown is Louisville, and she did her undergraduate at Brentwood University, and her hobbies are singing and songwriting. Mary has been accepted as an admit student, and so she is considering whether or not she wants to attend Brentwood University Law School. She is now an admit student. And we're going to follow Mary from admit through the first year. We're going to skip over the second year. We're going to go into the third year. We're going to see the portal as it goes through all these steps. We're going to look at the portal as she becomes an alumni, and then she's going to take a temporary position as a staff member for a few months. So we'll jump right in as an admit student. On the admit homepage, when Mary logs in, you can see that this message and this content is specifically targeted to an admit student. We have a message for the dean. We have branding about confirming your status and making your final deposit. We have some organizations that she's already involved in, the Student Life organization. We have some interactive type tools that are good for admitted students to encourage them to come to the school and give them the information that they need. So a lot of marketing and branding thought has gone into what does the admit need to see. Information about housing and chat with a professor, interactive tools like that. And then here at the bottom you can see we have announcements that are specific to admit students. These might be reminders or deadlines or things that an admit needs to take care of. So she's logged into her admit portal and has all the information that she probably needs as an admit student, especially the information that she needs to encourage her to come to our law school. Over on the quick links bar you can see it's customized again for the admit. To encourage them to make their final deposit, to register for classes. And then at the top we have some of the features where she can browse the various departments of the law school. The docket feature, which is just a different way of looking at announcements. They can sort and filter, and we'll show that in a moment. So Mary decides this is a great portal. I want to go to this law school. So Mary becomes a first-year student. She makes her second deposit, and she is now enrolled in some courses. So based on the courses that she's enrolled in the student information system, we display that course list here on the top right. These are the courses that she's decided to start with. She's enrolled in some organizations. She dropped that Student Life organization that she was enrolled in. She has some new announcements. The announcements no longer pertain to her as an admit. They pertain to her as a 1L. And so we start putting out deadlines about when she can add and drop courses and things of that nature. You can see also at the top navigation bar we've added a new application. So we say once you're a law student, you now have access to the room reservation application. You can reserve study rooms in the library. So we provide application information. Again, targeted content. It's concise. It's very direct to the target that we're trying to reach. And it's organized. So when the student logs in, they know where to find things. They know that their course list will be here on their home page, and the announcements that they need to know about are timely. So these are the announcements that she needs to know about today. And then over on the left, you can see that the quick links has changed slightly, and she's now given access into Westlaw and applications like that. If Mary were to jump into this here legal ethics and seminar course, she wants to familiarize herself with the course materials and the course in general. This application, this SharePoint application, includes this LMS component. It's got standard LMS functionality, learning management system or courseware type functionality, the instructor profiles and the video links. Anytime we can pull those from a database, such as the SIS system or a media server, we try to do that and post them into this course if we can make that correlation in the student information system. We have our seating chart component here in our course. And since Mary is, she's a new law student, she's not really familiar with the law school, she's familiarizing herself with this course. Mary wants to go in and find out what the room's going to look like when she has to show up. So she can come in here and seat herself in the seat. So she sees that, okay, two students have picked seats, that the rest of the class is open. I want on the back row, so I'm going to select the seat in the back row. And I'm going to print this so I can take it to class with me, or I can open up my laptop and pull it up when I go to class and see what room 112 looks like. So it's just another function that we take from the old paper-based cut and paste method where the piece of paper runs around the room, and the students sign it, and the teacher's assistants paste photos on it. Let's just let the students see themselves right here. And then the faculty members, when they come to the course site, they can just see this with the photos in here, and they have multiple print options, and they can print the layout format. They can print flashcards or rosters. So Mary's completed the first part of her first year. Let's run to the end of her first year as a law student. And you can see that her page has begun to become very full now. She's got a lot to do here. We've got some course evaluations. Again, we want timely information on her page. So if it's time to take her course evaluations, we want that web part to show up at the top of the page. We want that to be most prominent next to her course site. Again, we're trying to take this information, the course announcements and things that she needs to do, and put them in close proximity to places that we know that she'll be spending her time. Near organizations that she's involved in, near course sites, exams that she may or may not need to take at this particular time, near student self-service links over on the left. But here we have a course evaluation that she needs to start. So once again, Mary's going to go into the legal ethics course, and she's going to start her exam. And she can start it from the web part there, the course evaluation web part, or she can start it from the little call-out icon there at the bottom. Either way, she decides she's going to take the course, because in this scenario at Brentwood University Law School, Mary has to take her course evaluation in order to get her exam ID. So we can build workflow into this to require the students to do 1, 2, 3 in order to complete steps in the order that we want them to complete. So she's going to come in here and she's going to evaluate and rate her instructor, fill it all in and submit it and get her exam ID. So she has her exam ID, she's ready to take her exam for this particular course. However, Mary thinks she might need to study a little bit. She has a couple questions about the exam for her instructor. So Mary Travers is going to prep for the upcoming exam by meeting with her instructor. So she goes back to that course site, and she's up here at the top. You can see the instructor profile, and this is probably a little hard for you to read, but it says View Office Hours. She can reserve office hours for this particular instructor right from the course site. So she clicks on that, and she can see her instructor's schedule. And this is really a cool feature, because Mary's thinking, well, why should I have to run over there and check the paper on the door to find out if he's going to be there? I should be able to do that in my portal. So she can check it here on her portal, and she can decide, okay, I want to reserve some time with this instructor. She can type in the note, what she wants to meet with him about, and he or she can view that in their course site and say, okay, well, there's Mary Travers, there's her photo, this is what she wants to talk to me about, and have that accessible to them right from within the portal. So not only are students accessing this, but the faculty on the back end are able to utilize it as well. Once she's completed setting up a meeting with her instructor, she thinks, well, I should probably reserve a study room, get some of my friends together to study for this exam I'm going to take. So she can go up to the top there where it says room reservations, and she can select that and reserve a library study room. And she can see the whole schedule. Again, she doesn't have to run over to the library and look through the book at the front desk to find out which study rooms are available. She can see right here, well, here's the number of rooms, these are the number of seats in the room. You can actually put the audio-video information in there on which rooms have what type of AV equipment. And she can reserve one of these rooms by selecting one of them and selecting the date and the room that she wants to be in, and reserve that for her and her study group for the upcoming exam. So she's talked to the instructor, she's reserved the study room, now it's time to take the exam. You can see that she's completed this course evaluation here, so that web part drops down lower priority on her course site. She cannot yet review the results because the instructor has to submit the grades before those results are released. We can build in that type of workflow in SharePoint. So all she has to do to start this take-home exam is hit the start button here, and then she's provided with the honor code statement and some general instructions. And this process replaces the process of the student going to the registrar's office, picking up a piece of paper, signing the honor code statement, handing that to them, taking the paper, going back, typing up the exam in Word or WordPerfect, putting it on a file, and then taking it back to the registrar. and then the registrar is putting discs and computers and printing the exams out. She downloads the exam material, fills it out, re-uploads it. We're going to keep track of time and whether or not they're over and such. And then the registrar, from the registrar's portal, can basically take the exam, see who's completed them in this particular course for legal ethics, and batch print them. And once they batch print them into a PDF, they can then submit them back to the instructor via their course site, where they can print them out in paper format and hand them to the instructor. It can all be done anonymously using exam IDs as well. And the exam ID was given after she completed the evaluation, so it's an anonymous exam, even though it's a take-home. So moving on, we're going to skip the second year because we don't really need to go through that. But the third year, I want to point out some features that have to do with the announcements and the docket feature. So Mary's about to graduate, so she's going to have announcements and features that are appropriate for her position as a third-year law student. So here in the middle of the page, you can see we have announcements that are appropriate for that particular time frame. There's no reason for these announcements to go out to any 1Ls or 2Ls because they're not graduating. So Mary logs into her homepage. You can see branding of the homepage is slightly changed. We now can put images up here for commencement and that type of thing. And we have the cap and gown order announcement, and it has a read requirement on it, if you'll notice. And then underneath that one, we have the commencement general announcement, which has an RSVP tag on it. So we can actually take announcements and not only tag them for the role, but we can actually categorize them and say, well, this is an announcement that's a deadline, and it has to have a read requirement on it, because the registrar office needs to know how many people have read this cap and gown order. So if we were to click into this, actually, if we were to click into, I'm sorry, I got a little mixed up here. We're going to go to the docket first. So if we were to go to the docket to see these same announcements in a slightly different format, we would click the docket tab, and we'd be brought into the docket. You can see we've got that same announcement about cap and gown orders. It's under the deadlines tab. So we can search through all of the announcements that are applicable to us as a third-year law student based on different categories. How many RSVPs do I have this week? We're looking at a week view. We can go forward or backwards in this view. So this is an electronic docket rather than putting together a PDF and posting it to a website or something like that. It's much easier to search. We have keywords we can search on. But for this example, we're still looking at the cap and gown. It's got a read requirement on it. So we want to look at this and we want to mark it as read. And what that does for the registrar or the department that's creating this announcement, they can now say, well, I've sent this announcement to 100 students. 90 of them have read it. We know that they've marked it as read. I can generate a report and see who has and has not read this, or at least looked at this and said that they've read it. Then I can specifically email those 10 people, or I can pick up the phone and call those 10 people. So the target, this helps us to become a lot more concise with our announcements and target students more correctly. The RSVP works similarly. They can basically say whether or not they're coming to something, and they can generate reports on who's coming and who isn't. And that works well with staff when they're having a conference or something, and there's food provided. They want to know how many people are coming, and a lot of emails tend to go around whether you want chicken or beef or a salad or whatever. So it streamlines that process. If we were to jump to the Departments tab, you can see that same announcement because it came from the registrar's office. We're now at the department site. The same announcement is shown there for Mary as a third-year law student, but that announcement was created one time, but it shows up in 3 different places. So there's not a repeat of continually pushing out information and recreating information. This announcement can be spread throughout the portal where it needs to be seen. And what the department sites allow is it allows the department staff to create and manage their own content from within the portal. So you as a staff member of the Student Affairs Office, you can create an announcement, you can tag it, I want this to go to first-year law students and faculty, and those are the people that it's going to show up in their list, in their docket, on the course, on the department site when they come visit. You can also see that there are forms here that are specific to third-year law student Mary, and we have some other features over there on the quick links. The department quick links changes as well. That's appropriate for the particular role that for the user that's visiting the department site. And again, the staff of this department site manages content and the content pages in this site. So Mary finally graduates. She ordered her cap and gown finally, and got that done. She graduates, and she now, her role changes. She changes from a law student in the student information system to an alumni. That process happened in the student information system. We have our identity management tools that can pick up that process and create the proper role. Now for an alumni, put her into the appropriate alumni groups. And when she logs into her portal, she is now seeing alumni appropriate content. So here, we want to continue to talk to these students even after they're going, or the alumni folks, even after they're graduating, because they can donate back to our law school. We want them to attend different events for alumni. So again, school announcements has changed. This content is very targeted, it's concise, and it's timely here. Of course, we have certain time frames that these announcements need to show up, and they drop off. The local weather web part, this is a feature that I put here to demonstrate that the users can actually do some customization. You know, there's CNN web parts, there's sports web parts, there's weather web parts. So if you wanted to open this up and allow the user to be able to add web parts and personalize their page, you could do that as well. There's a lot of web parts out there available. They're just standard SharePoint web parts, or third parties create web parts all the time. We can also add features for networking in here where they can keep track of their fellow students as they move on in life. Links and organizations. They can still be, alumni could still be a member of some organization in a law school, so we want to make sure that we continue to allow collaboration sites for that. So, and then again, I talked about donating, you know, it could be a link or a way into the student self-service application to allow them to be able to make online donations and things like that. So again, another way to target information based on the user's role. So Mary is an alumni, but she decides that after being out of law school, there's a temporary staff position that she wants to take for a few months to kind of help the school out. Now this is an interesting scenario because she's still an alumni, but yet she's a staff member. So how do we give her the appropriate roles and access now? Well, you can see at the top, she still has her alumni site up there, but because she's a staff member, now she has her web mail, her mail access on her page. She has some courses that she's a staff member over, and she can go in and create content in those course sites. She is able to, up here in the collaboration site, that is the staff member site where she can collaborate with other staff members and share documents just among staff members of this particular department. And we have the faculty administration content management site, and that's the site where she can create content and post it out to the users based on their roles. And then the quick links again changes based on her position as a staff member, and of course she will get announcements, events, and deadlines for the staff member. Now to see announcements, events for the alumni, she would go click on the alumni, go back to her alumni site, and see the appropriate content there. So we can handle that situation of being a staff member, an alumni, an instructor, and so on.
Hey, you want to talk about the weather, or the
oh, yes.
emergency part?
Yeah, go ahead, Ian.
I was just going to say that even though it's May and there's snow, I don't know where we would be able to see that, but
Southern Hemisphere.
okay. In this event, we've actually got a little emergency management messaging system in here. So there's actually another site basically built to communicate advisories or emergencies to portal users. So person or persons responsible for communicating that message have the ability to go in their department site. They can create a graphic. It can be all text. It can be a combination of the two. They basically go set that up in a little list, and they activate it. And once they activate it, it overrides all of those welcome images that you guys have been seeing throughout the presentation. It's going to override all of that. It's going to be front and center for all portal users. So it's just one way of basically communicating. So let's say there's say, you know, campus is closed, and you need to get that out to all students, staff, and faculty. There's multiple means of doing that. I know that, you know, right now there's means for sending it to people on their phones. This is just another option for that. So as a student would log into their portal, they'd see that message saying all classes canceled, you know, today due to weather advisory. This perhaps is a bad illustration, but
Should put a tornado on
yeah.
it or something. So Mary finishes up her temporary position. She's finished working at the law school. She's looking for her new career, her calling in life. So Mary joins a folk singing group in Philadelphia. And that's really who Mary Travers is. So anyway, we're going to have some time for questions and comments and things like that, but I think I want to turn it over to Tony just for a few minutes to talk about some of the technical considerations. There's a whole issue of, well, how do we know what role a user really is, and what are the technical considerations for getting the SharePoint environment in place, and you know, really how easy is getting a solution like this in place. So I want to let Tony talk about some of that. So I'll turn it over to Tony Forsythe.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, just real quick, a couple of things we have to kind of accomplish to be able to do this. We need good integration with data sources. We can't put this burden back on the IT staff to keep all these roles in sync, all this information. So we need to be able to pull that information automatically, synchronize that, hopefully at a minimum hourly or daily, so we have that relevant, you know, the correct information about the courses they're in. If they've dropped, that quickly goes away. If they've added, that course is quickly there. And again, we're communicating the right information to the student. Policy governance. So this is just a, you know, so as we talk about communications policy and access management policy, these are things that the school needs to do. Back to the commitment Dan talked about, that policy has to be defined. We have to, as that changes, the portal has to be in sync with that. So if we decide that some group is no longer going to have access to a sub-site, that has to be managed appropriately. So we get that, we do that through SharePoint lists and things like that to control that policy. Access and role management. This is the permission side of the organization. So inside those course sites, who has permissions to reserve a study room or something like that. So what we need to do is tie into the same student information systems and then provision groups inside Active Directory or groups inside LDAP to make sure that the permissions are in sync with the portal. This is a big challenge because if those two things get out of whack, again, you can't see the right stuff, you can't do the right stuff based on who you are. And then we need some kind of collaboration environment. Again, we've used SharePoint MOS 2007. Doesn't need to be MOS, it can just be the WSS, the lower cost version of SharePoint. But you need some type of good tool set there to add collaboration into this bigger environment for communication. Because if you start adding new pieces for collaboration outside this environment, you're watering down the effect, and you really want to consolidate all that information. So that's basically what I wanted to say about, you know, some of the technical integration components.
I think there's another slide here. Do I have another one?
Yeah, so this is just a quick little picture of kind of how we do that. Again, the banner PeopleSoft or some custom SIS. We have connectors that tie to those. So instead of a whole series of data components that we need to keep in sync that integrate with a whole series of different tools that do this thing, we grab all that information at one point. We take that point, we run it through our SQL Server database that supports the entire portal and present that information and control, navigation, access, etc. And we do the same thing on the identity management side. So that same group that controls permissions to Course 5 and allows them to do things in Course 5 also is routed through and creates groups in Active Directory that can control all kinds of access for people in that group. So we want to keep identity, access, security components in sync with content components to facilitate the entire process. I think that's all. Questions? Comments?
Do you have anything that sort of, I mean, I know this runs on Windows and SharePoint, anything that works like open source software or Drupal or anything like that?
On the identity management side, we have a whole series of drivers that can connect to, you know, any sort of LDAP component. On the portal side, no, we're SharePoint focused right now. But Drupal, I'm not that familiar with security provisioning in Drupal. Can it be driven from LDAP sources?
There is an LDAP module, I haven't played with it myself, and it can be, I do believe the LDAP module does have all the security groups and stuff like that, but I don't know, I haven't tried it.
Okay. So if it can support LDAP, we have drivers and things like that that can provision into LDAP, and then LDAP can then control, functions within those other components.
Is this mostly like a read-only application, like students would be able to go in here and drop a class or interact with Banner, they can pull out information out and they can kind of see their big picture, but it's not really a tool for going in and dropping a class.
Exactly. We are not pushing information back into PeopleSoft, back into Banner, things like that. Okay, we're looking at that sort of thing.
Right.
But there tend to be other, Banner, other portal components that those
Right.
vendors provide that we would just then jump out to.
Right.
Where possible, we try to synchronize authentication.
Yeah.
So once you're in our system, you click that link to go over to that portal function, it knows
Right.
who you are.
Sure,
So you
yeah.
just jump over there to, drop the class or whatever it might be, doing pay for something.
Okay.
But yeah, we don't want to, so we think of ourselves as this, we're really zoned into that communications portion of the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have LMS, we have the learning management components, we have all these other workflow components. But we don't want to be a Banner, we don't want to be
Right,
a
sure.
student information system. We want to cooperate very nicely with those.
Right.
So we're talking to a whole series of vendors about how we can, smoothly transition back and forth and then stay in sync with information that they have, whether it be feeds of data out of those systems or what it is. But rarely do we want to take over the functionality of those.
Right, sure.
It's best of breed, right?
Sure, yeah.
We're very good at this communication component. They're very good at that part.
Right, sure.
As far as contributions from the students during the process, there's drop boxes and students can create sub-sites and they can create student organizations and things like that. So they can push a lot of
Right.
content and data and whatever into the system, but it's not pushed back through that.
Right.
If I can get back up to that, it's rarely put back down through this process. There are a few exceptions to that in some of the installs we've done, but for the most part, that's the direction we go.
And my other question was, the SharePoint environment, is that something that always has to be hosted internally? Like we need our own SharePoint environment? You guys don't provide like a hosted SharePoint we can buy?
The typical install, I'll say all the ones we've done today have been installed at schools.
Okay.
Typically, they have the licensing inexpensively. Typically, they have access to data
Yeah.
centers and things like that. Not a requirement. I mean, we can also, there are hosting providers
Yeah,
that do SharePoint and
all
specialize in
over the
SharePoint.
place, yeah.
We can buy dedicated servers, systems from them, host the whole thing out there, and then manage the communications back to these other SISs over some secure link. So,
Have you done any disaster planning with the organizations who use this in the installs so that they can have more than one location for the different SISs or servers or even different locations for the SharePoint?
We haven't been involved in much of that. The discussion does come up in the deployment process of, talk to me about your backup process. We just want to go through a checklist and make sure they've thought of those issues. Typically, if we'd like to kind of acquire all those services from the data center, whether it be a hosting center that we, cooperate on purchasing, or their own internal staff there. But it is very standard SQL Server, so if you have disaster recovery on SQL Server components, the rest of it kind of goes along and rides along that standard SQL Server redundancy or whatever model. So we have seen a whole series of models here where I show one in my SQL database. Technically, there's another SharePoint content database as well. Those can be spread across a series of, a server farm in cases on the front end side, and then redundant servers on the back end. Microsoft has a whole strategy for that. We don't do that consulting, but we know people that can help with that.
As far as customizing like the look of it, is that something like, is it just kind of out of the box, it all looks the same? Do we do our own branding? Do we work with you to do that? Or do we just go into SharePoint and add our own web parts and certain parts? Like, how customizable? I mean, I know that SharePoint's really easy to custom for a user to customize things, so how much control do you give or not give to?
The typical process is we'll go in, there's an analysis process where we meet with each of the departments to configure the kind of the communications policy components inside the organization, and then we meet with the branding, whoever controls branding inside the organization. Ian's group will then, you can maybe talk a little bit more about that, but what Ian's group does then is at the end of that analysis, we'll present 2 or 3 options on the branding look. They'll select one, and then as part of implementation, we deliver that branded look At that point, we can then turn that over to the school, and if they're good with SharePoint Designer and things like that,
Right,
they
and
can
notify them.
then go off. If they want to adjust templates that we've created, they can go from there. For example, you saw the different student subsites and things like that. There can be one or a whole series of templates that are used for those different types of subsites.
Right.
The course template, right? Dan jumped into the course template, that's our standard one, but we've seen variations on that where they want to add in, this is more important to me or less important to me, so, yeah.
We should also talk about our philosophy of IT staff being able to buy or add.
Yeah, so along those same lines, we want to be very careful as developers not to interfere with your ability to extend that application after we're gone, right? After the initial development's done, again, you see some cool part that is very good, very applicable, something that integrates in some newbies. Maybe Twitter has some SharePoint component that you can drop in.
Right,
We don't want to get in the way of that. We want to allow that functionality. We want to act as glue between these pieces.
Yeah, sure.
And again, we feel we have to kind of be soft in a way. And if we try to own that world, we just can't.
Yeah,
Right.
sure, yeah.
We're good at a bunch of different workflows. We're good at flowing communications. We're good at branding. We're good at navigation. Let's let the rest of the world be good at what they're good at.
SharePoint's easy to kind of customize and play around with, so.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a good platform. Well, I did have one question about that. How does it work in other browsers? Like, how does it work in Firefox and Safari? And because I know sometimes I've seen SharePoint sites that are
Sure.
outside of Internet Explorer aren't so great. So.
Yeah, actually, Milo is totally cross-browser compatible.
Okay.
We've got lots of schools that have big percentages of Mac users, things of that nature. So Safari, Firefox, again, it's cross-browser.
We test on all platforms.
Okay.
And we do specifically, there are, SharePoint out of the box won't always work very smoothly with some of those, so we do make adjustments to
Make adjustments. To make
And there
various
are-
components.
yeah,
You
yeah.
can talk about, like Tolerant.
But yeah, there are other tool sets that essentially build on top of this. So for example, the RTF controls that SharePoint provides out of the box are replaced by a Tolerant control. It's actually a free control that a RAD editor control that basically overwrites that. So that's all worked into our code as
Yeah,
well.
so you guys have dealt with all those problems.
Right,
isn't it?
right.
Okay.
So all testing, all regression testing happens on multiple
Right,
platforms just to
sure.
make sure, we're good to go.
We talked a lot about the student user. Are there any questions about how a faculty member or a staff member or the IT staff might use this or utilize it?
Do you have any
But-
examples?
I would just state that the process of the process is very, it's very similar for all users, and I think that's maybe one of the advantages to it. So as a user goes through the life cycle, it's not like they're learning, they don't have to go learn a new CMS. As they go from a staff to, or from a student to a staff member. Basically, the screenshots that we showed here are again from the student's perspective, but especially when we get to like course sites and things of that nature, and I'm not sure if any of you guys are actually familiar with SharePoint, but there are, as a user, as we grant a user more access or greater permissions, there are just simple links that are provided. Create new content. Right below each one of those little sections. I don't know if we can go back to that. There isn't a whole lot of. It's a very simple kind of process. Very simple workflow. So as a user, let's go back one more. Keep going. One more. And again. I want to go back to the course site page.
Will this work?
Actually, go back one more, because this is all this content is really driven to the student. Keep going.
I think I'm gonna go back about 50.
I'm sorry. Here, this is perfect. No,
Too far.
yeah, too far. Okay, perfect. So if I were a student, for example, and I have access to, so at most universities that we've implemented that, a student has essentially read-only access to most of the lists and libraries that are in the site, including a lot of our custom parts. But let's say that the instructor wants to give them full access to the course wiki or the course blog or the social networking tools or the discussion board. We want to allow them to collaborate with other students. We have utilities that essentially we work with you guys to understand that up front and then provide that function here. So a student would come in here as opposed to it just displaying a list of available Discussion boards, there's a link to add new discussion board or comment or whatever it may be. And they're very, very simple, straightforward forms, web-based forms. And maybe, we don't have any screenshots of those, but we can give you
Come by,
demonstrations.
yeah, come by the booth. I was thinking the same thing as we got to the presentation. I think we should have shown one of the
Yeah.
screens that the registrar would use and
Yeah.
how they kind of classify and target that content that might have been.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've actually got some of that back, back at the booth.
Yeah, so yeah, swing by and we can show you some of those pieces, but it is it gives them that ability to not just, okay, here's some text that I want to put in there, but then it can expand into things like, is this a deadline that's important? Is this an event as well? Is this targeted content? Who should I target this to?
This is actually, there is an example over here. So I'm a student, I don't have access, I have access to the course calendar and I can read it, okay? And actually in this actions tab here, there's the ability to export as an XML feed or an RSS or I think iCal is actually one of the options as well. But if I actually had access to this, so I'm an instructor and I want to go create a new course item, I'm also going to get a new tab here as well, right? So I'm just clicking the new. I'm going to say, new event, new calendar item, and I go in there and again we go to the forms we're talking about. So, and really it's very similar with all of the list of libraries that we see here. So it's
From a usability point of view, yeah, once you learn one, you've learned them all.
Yeah,
It's very standard. So and as well as departments, you're in any of the departments, you're creating content, it's the same way.
same way.
So a training issue, as people move around the organization, it's the same thing. It's the same way that the CSO communicates with the, student that the financial aid might communicate with the student. So it becomes very standard, very easy. Again, reducing training.
Is there like a staging server if you're making some real design changes, like changing the templates and stuff, like are you taking the site down, do you have a staging server that you kind of play around with your design changes and then what, you like port it over or something like that?
Yeah, there's a whole model for deployment that we go through, and
Right.
we've got several, but probably the standard one is our development servers in our office then feed to staging servers, and at the client site, the client can then go in there and look at all the new stuff we're deploying or changes we've made,
Right, yeah.
or changes they've
Or
made.
changes that we want to make.
Exactly,
So if
yeah.
we want to rebrand our, a year after we buy it, we want to
Exactly.
change the branding and change the templates.
Absolutely.
I don't want to take the site, the student portal down for, like 3 days while I do that, so I want to have my designers do that, and then you guys have a way to just port all the
And then it
changes.
migrates, yeah,
It'll migrate
and
over.
everything is SharePoint solution-based,
Right, okay.
right? So it's not, in the old days, if you were deploying from one SharePoint site to another, it was a big job, and
Yeah,
if you had 100 sub-sites, you had a
Yeah.
big job to kind of get those all back at sync. And these days, we use solution deployments for all those pieces, so it's, if it worked in deployment, you're guaranteed that it's going to work going into production as well. So it's
And typically in all the schools that we've done the implementation for, we've got that staging server. We ensure that staging server is in the same shape as the production server, so there are no surprises when we end up
when
going
you
to
move
production.
over.
Other questions? We're kind of running short on time, so I want to make sure anybody has. How about comments? Does this seem like something that would be useful in a law school environment to improve communication, I guess?
What tools do you use today for these sorts of things?
I'm curious, sort of not answering that, but some of this may be proprietary information. At the schools where you've been called on to do this, are they part of a university? And if they are they finding or have they raised with you whether the university itself either offers no solution or its solution is inadequate for the law school's needs?
Yes. An example, we do have an example like that. American University is an example. University, the law school is separate. Law school has their budget at the law school and the budget at IT. There is a little bit of a push-pull between those departments as to how are we going to, look, you're building a bunch of groups in LDAP for permissions in this system that I don't need in central IT or want to manage. So that's where the academic access manager component that we have fits in. It can then say, oh, look, we'll get all this information from central IT that they provide that you need, right? Central IT creates the AD user object. It'll put them in some basic groups. They then grant us control to create groups in a folder level for just the law school. And then we can manage permissions at that level.
But manage permissions for what applications?
For our application specifically. But really, the groups created in that folder could be used for any application at the law school.
Because if I'm a University of Cincinnati, and if I were going to try to implement something like that, before I would come to you, I would go back to, first of all, I would have to push the people in the law school to see the benefit of a centralized application, but I think I would then turn to campus, the main campus, and say, you're already using Blackboard in what looks to me like an implementation of Blackboard portal. We want you to customize part of it for us.
Right. Right. And those things happened before we got to a lot of these places, and they were unable to fulfill the need. And that's where the law school said, well, we got our money, we're gonna go off. And now, not that we wouldn't like to sell the things to the whole
Right, but
school, we'd love to do that.
And what is happening, from what I hear at more and more institutions that are parts of universities, is there's a lot more centralization going on where the central university is saying, you want to spend your money, you still got to justify it in our system.
Yeah, that is a big issue, and we're fighting with that. And we don't, we would love to, for the law schools that go to Central IT, and we sell it to the whole organization, we use it as a standard platform across the university.
But in that case, you're late, for the entire campus, you are late to market.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of schools that are adopting SharePoint at Central IT and then pushing that down from Central IT. And we can play in that environment as well.
Microsoft's kind of late to market, but then they have so much of everything else, they can push it through their academic licensing. I mean, uPortal and Blackboard have been around in this market for several years.
Right.
Well, like the implementations that we've already done, American, they were piggybacking off the central IT for their Blackboard implementation. And they're replacing their Blackboard LMS with our version. Yale did the exact same thing. Yale had their own Blackboard implementation at Yale Law School, and they pushed that aside and ended up using ours.
And we've got work utilities that'll suck it out of Blackboard and drop it into here, so you get all your stuff.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, there's a big battle going on. It's hard to say who's going to win and how that's going to play out. And it ebbs back and forth. So we let the schools control it. They have trouble with it, so it ebbs back. Flows back to Central IT. They don't have the capacity or the understanding of the differences at the school level. But I think SharePoint is one of those platforms that allows us to cooperate. Where the Central IT could push out a lot of content into a portal like this, where each school had its own instance of the SharePoint portal. So we're looking for strategies to cooperate to solve this problem. But you're right, that's a big problem. It's a big policy problem.
I'm wondering when Oracle's going to try to move into this space.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a quick question. Do you find a lot of alumni logging in and using the system? And if some of the schools found either, not necessarily increased donation amounts, because the economy's down, right? But more people participating in donating?
Yeah, I don't know that we
haven't done
alumni turned on anywhere except.
Well, it's GW. GW
has
yeah.
one.
George Washington will be the first to do the alumni.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's actually staged for the phase 2.
Because if you could show more people just donating something or being in contact,
Oh, sure.
that'd be a selling point.
I'm looking for a whole series of ways that we can measure the value of this. And it's hard because it's hard to measure stuff that happens on paper and email and things like that. But yeah, I'm looking for ways to measure, alumni donations up, or, overall communications are improved. But I'm trying to come up with some kind of good mechanism to measure good communication policy versus weak communications policy, and then how that translates to value. And if you guys have seen tools on ways to do that, I'd love to, see that stuff. But I'm still grasping for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I know when I've talked to development officers at schools, they primarily get all their donations, from like Larry Page or something, right? It all comes in one big chunk. But they like to keep in contact in some way with everybody. They have a rough time doing that.
Sure.
And even if they just give like $25 a year, that's actually much more valuable than zero. But even just the contact or an email where they respond back in some way, then if they do become a partner at Baker McKenzie or something, then they're ready there with the contacts. So
Sure.
Well, and we're seeing these other networking things, like LinkedIn.
Yeah.
LinkedIn will have groups that are, graduates from School X, right?
But you're normally controlled by a student, not by the development office, which is a
Exactly.
separate issue they face.
Right. So how can we leverage that value that's being created by itself out there for some of these problems? And again, I think it's still very is young, but if we can find ways to link in, no pun intended, to the value that's created in those other networks, and facilitates some of that communication, I think that's a good thing for the school. Because different people want to use different tools. So if we can, we can tie to a Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter.
Do you have OAuth?
What links they-
Do you have OAuth integration or anything like that?
I'm not sure what that is.
Just you log in one place, you can log in different places, you can set different permissions through your system.
Single sign-on? Yeah, we usually, the
Kind of
one,
like that, but yeah.
We're looking at CAS. Does anyone use CAS, Central Authentication Service, for some of that sort of thing? Yeah, but no, I haven't.
So if you have a link going out to another system, for instance, the registrar of the university to, make a payment, for instance, it would open the registrar's webpage, but would you be able to set it up so that their login is done?
It depends. It's kind of a bigger question than just this, but that can be done technically, but it would require cooperation at that level. So we can't make that system accept our authentication, but if there's single sign-on planning and things like that going on, if we're all on AD or we're all on LDAP or if we're using CAS, one of those kind of solutions, we can do that, but out of the box it doesn't do that. But technically, you can.
Have you done it in some cases?
Yale, we're talking to them about
CAS.
using CAS for that specific function. So when they sign into SharePoint, we establish a CAS ticket. The user then has that ticket in the browser system for wherever they go, so that if they're in any Yale system, that ticket authenticates them and allows that other system to authenticate them as they go. So they can easily bounce around between these systems and not require a login, even if we're on different servers. They're jumping from server to server and back.
Right. We do that all the time. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, with the example of, she's a student now, she's an alumni, but she's also a, employee, is that still tied to the same account, like the way that we do it is, we have a student account, but if you're an employee, you get a separate employee account.
Yeah.
And it does, our portal does sort of tie them together, like you log on, but you also have two accounts?
That's, Dan Moore is our identity management sales guy, so you might want to swing by and we can talk about that. That's a big identity management issue.
Yeah.
Well, the way we like to think about that is that the identity is the identity. If we can give you one net ID, that is also your Active Directory ID or your LDAP ID, and then we can maintain that going forward. I know the systems we've done for hospitals, once you use a user ID, you never want to use that again, because there's going to be a rehire, and we're not going to know which one of the people actually did this in the log, and it becomes unauditable downstream. So yeah, our recommendation is that you would keep that guy there, and then just re-enable that account when he came back, so he wouldn't get another account. Which comes to another identity management problem. If they start accumulating 3, 4, 5 accounts, which one am I managing access to? You have a big, complicated problem there.
Well, we have that problem too, like what if somebody's an employee and then they start going to school, it's like,
Yeah.
so it's not like they always have the student account first,
Right.
or faculty account first.
What's happened there is that the account is being confused with the role. And really, the person is still a person, but the roles are changing.
Yeah.
I'm a student, I'm not a student anymore, I'm an employee, now I'm a student and an employee. And often these systems don't deal well with multiple roles and roles changing.
Yeah.
But as developers, we needed to deal with that occurrence ongoing, because that's just the new
Sure,
world.
yeah,
We have to live in.
And if you're like the IT department or can you go in and see, like this is the problem we have with our portal. It's like if we want to go in as like, the web team or whatever to go in, it's really hard to see. Like I want to see what all the users see. I want to see what faculty see, even though I'm not a faculty member.
Right.
I want to see what students see, even though I'm not a student or an alumni. I want to be able to, from a design, if I'm like, making changes to the template or whatever, I want to be able to go in and see all the different roles, even though I'm not part of them. You guys have a solution, like a test account.
Yeah, you can do that a couple different ways. We can do that with test accounts. So typically at all the schools we've done the implementation for, we've got student accounts,
Right.
staff accounts, faculty accounts. But in addition to that, we've got emulation utilities. So as an IT, department member, you go to your intranet administration page, and there's a little emulate function there that allows you to go up, pick the user that you want to emulate. So you get a call from a student. I don't see my exam on my, on my home
Yeah,
page. You can go emulate that student and see what they see.
See what they see.
Yeah. And then from a department standpoint, when they go and they generate content and they target to a specific, role or group, they want to see what that content looks like before it goes live. So technically it's a little publishing feature, but it allows them to go in and emulate a role. So I want to go emulate that 3L, and I want to see what that 3L is going to see on their page before activating. So those are also built in.
Three tiers or three different ways.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually better than I've heard before. You can't even do that.
It's a big issue because the departments were throwing those announcements out there, and then they were saying, I don't see an announcement until they threw another, they were multiple out there. So.
People call it help desk, like if students call it help desk and they're like, I'm in my portal and I'm trying to, like the person on the other line can't even help them and they're like, I don't know what you see. I see an employee.
Yes?
Have you ever considered having a live chat through the individual classes? I don't know how professors would feel about this, but sometimes we get a chat room going among the students with computers in one room, which is really helpful, especially if your professor talks really quickly. You can say, okay, what was the third point of what he just said? And somebody else who caught it can be like, oh, it's this. I haven't seen that done through.
That's a great suggestion.
I heard the request.
Done
But,
that.
what tool do you use usually?
We usually use Gtalk,
Gtalk, okay.
and do a group chat.
And something to look into. Yep.
I don't know how the professors would feel about it if all the students are talking while the professor is.
Well, maybe
Sounds like you're already doing that.
I think if we were to end up implementing something like that, we would make that configurable by course. So the instructor would have the choice of allowing students to chat via within the course. They can turn that feature on and off. Now we have similar other configurable
Per class
kind of
hashtags.
features, student roster
Live
and
tweets
email
go on
tools.
the projector.
From the course site, an instructor can go in and allow students to see the course roster and email other students within the course, directly, or they can turn that option off. So at some schools, it's against policy to allow a student, you to see everybody else in your course, even though you see them every day. There's a policy against that. But in other schools, they want to be open, and there's no reason. Now, you couldn't go to a class that you weren't in and see that roster and those types of things. That's all handled via security. But again, we try to build as much of this stuff with configuration options.